leaders who can do that, they're the ones that create followership and start to build a much bigger leadership shadow and all of those nice cheesy analogies.
Hi again, everyone in podcast land. It's me again, Joe España, welcoming you to another episode of Glimpses of the Blindingly Obvious. I hope you've been enjoying the series so far. If so, please subscribe and share Gobbo with your friends and colleagues. Better still, get in touch if you've got any comments or areas that you'd like me and a colleague to mull over in future episodes. Now, having worked with many teams at different organizational levels over the years, my antenna sometimes picks up a vibe in the team that nobody has mentioned. Thinking about this got me mulling over the question, what do you do when there's tension or conflict in the team? Sometimes I've seen team leaders completely abdicate any role in trying to address things, telling me that people are old enough to sort out their own problems. Conversely, I've had team leaders say that people concerned just need to have their heads knocked together. And there are probably other versions of this. But it got me thinking, I ought to have a chat with my good friend and colleague, Pippa Richardson, about the potential pitfalls of mediating team conflict. Pippa is a seasoned HR professional, having worked at director level at several FTSE companies. Now, as certified systemic team coach and workplace conflict mediator, she provides specific support to businesses who are experiencing relationship issues between individuals and teams. Just the perfect person to chinwag this subject over with. I've been working with, that I've been working with teams at different levels for many years. And it just occurred to me something that popped into my mind about an incident I had some years ago where I was working with a particular group, and you know what it's like when you first start working with them, you think there's something else going on here that I haven't quite got my finger on. Anyway, so I approached the team leader about this and I said, look, I don't know whether I'm barking up the wrong tree here, but I reckon is there something happening with the team? Is there some tension between people? What's going on? And they said straight out, oh yeah, I realize that there's tension in my team, but they can get on with it. And I thought, wow, talk about abdicating, any desire to kind of either smooth things over or mediate or whatever. And I wondered, have you ever come across anything like that?
Well, funnily, you should say, all the time. But both from the view down the telescope of having been in teams myself, where either I have been directly caught up in potential growing conflict, or I'm watching it go on with my peers, and the manager kind of gives off an aura of I can't be asked, or has made a few failed attempts to try and address the issue, but does it rather clumsily, and
makes it worse.
Basically, and then that drives their own fear and their own ego into a state of, well, yeah, I didn't do a very good job there. I'm clearly going to make it worse, so I'll just let it fester like a boil and hope that it either bursts or somebody can come and lance it for me.
I think that's really interesting, because obviously when they do decide to bring in somebody like you to mediate, that's kind of like quite a proactive taking of the initiative. But the other side, I think I've also experienced, is where the team leader takes far more of a, in TA terms, critical parent approach, and goes, right, what they need is these two need their heads knocking together. Yeah. As if that's going to. So on the one hand, you've got the, I don't want to go there because I'm going to open up a can of worms and I won't be able to deal with the emotional, fallout. On the other hand, the same coin of, I'm going to go in there with my size 14 shoes and break as much china in the shop. So I'm mixing my metaphors here, aren't I? But you know what I
You're
mean.
allowed.
You know what I mean. So I think that there's some real challenges, really, if you started to break that down. Some of the real challenges of deciding, well, I really feel I ought to mediate here because
Mhm.
it's starting to affect the rest of the team, or it's not helping. Perhaps it's two characters in particular, whatever the situation. So, what do you think about the pitfalls or the challenges of trying to mediate conflict or tension in a team?
Well, in terms of my current work, I normally I find increasingly I'm asked to go into situations to assist teams in conflict where the organization and all the layers above the team have not through bad intent, but the passage of time and other complexity means they've ended up being passively complicit in allowing this situation to percolate and
Yeah, like do
escalate.
nothing has contributed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm working with teams, I won't say where, but that they're long established teams because of the nature of the work they do. And some of the behavioral relationship ruptures, the cyclical bad karma knocking around has been going on for, with some clients 10 to 30 years.
Wow. So it's festering, festering, festering.
Festering, and then it becomes learned. So
How interesting.
you have a generational movement through the ranks, and everybody's learned from the people who've gone before them, that you don't sit down and try and explore how you connect as human beings. You adopt a position of management by stomping about and just and shouting at each other or complaining about each other and weaponizing those complaints. So by the time I get involved in some situations, people are completely entrenched. They've learned this is how they get by at work, and it's much more complicated work that I'm doing now because of the longevity of
Yeah, it
stuff.
feels like it's become part of the DNA or developed into part of the DNA of the organization. But if we go back down to sort of like the unit of the team, to be honest, I feel a bit of sympathy sometimes with team leaders where they're sort of backing away from that tension or the situation that exists perhaps between team members because of a sense of not quite knowing how to handle it. And I kind of feel, oh yeah, I get it. It's like, oh, it's a bit sensitive, or it's going to be so emotional, whatever it is. So therefore, I can understand. But then, of course, the other side, very often I hear, particularly recently, all the work and all the conversations that keep being made about psychological safety in the workplace and this notion of relationship trust and everything else. But of course, one thing that I think doesn't help in this sort of DNA situation you just described is I know that when I do diagnostic work with a lot of teams, one of the questions I like to ask is, this is not when there's tension, just literally when I'm working with team effectiveness or performance impact, that kind of thing. And when I'm interviewing individual team members, I ask a really simple question and I ask them to describe how do they see their membership, their personal membership of this team. And of course, it's really, really interesting because I can't tell you the number of times that somebody go, oh, well, Joe, I'm glad you asked that because we're not all equal on this team, right? We're not. And then they start to say, where do they, they're kind of like the power imbalances that could exist because maybe I've been in this team longer than somebody else. So
Yeah.
therefore, I feel a bit more senior. Or
Mm-hmm.
somebody's maybe just joined the team and therefore they're still finding their feet and the relationships in the team, etc. So I think that for a team leader is maybe another aspect of the not of the organization but the DNA of the team itself, and those power imbalances and sort of trying to handle that as part of mediating or getting through facilitating the tension that could exist.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and I think that there's extra pressure on leaders and managers in organizations now because the workforce demographic is so
Oh
complex.
yeah.
So, you could have a team where you've got a multi-generational dimension, and the team leaders going, well, I'd love to be able to crack a joke about this to break the ice, but Bill over there might find that really offensive, and or so much energy and time then gets consumed by that leader trying to internalize and make judgment calls about whether they're being appropriate or not, on a generational level, let alone creating the container within which their team can have a relaxed, open conversation. So yeah, it's a very interesting point that you raise, and I think where I try and coach team leaders in particular is to try and connect with themselves, and actually, what is it you need to see happen to shift in this team? And what do you believe some of the blockers are, and how can we sensibly together go about trying to knock them off one by one, rather than you starting to feel you've got this massive problem where your
it's
job
like
is
overwhelm.
boil the ocean. We all know that's impossible. So how do you get your canoe out and your paddle ready, and then we'll worry about the rest of it. So I in my work, I try and spend lots of time with the team leader to understand what their experience is of themselves leading. And then that helps me understand where they're connecting or not with the people in their team, as well as obviously understanding what everybody else's experience of the situation is. And it's always interesting, those first workshops, isn't it, where everybody comes in the room and you just see a completely different side to people, to the one
people lie, don't they? When they talk
completely.
To you individually, you get one version of the story, and then when they're in the room, when the conversation is more general, you go, hold on a minute, did I give the wrong end of the stick here?
Yeah.
Do you know something that you've raised? So there's several points here. I think the issue of the reality of work today with the multi-generational demographics and the expectations, needs, wants, desires of each generation, and how they view this idea of, I'm waving my fingers around, inverted commas, work, right? And so baby boomers will look at it differently from Gen Zs and who have you. But it occurred to me that there's another couple of layers here, which is some of from the team leader's point of view, some of the unconscious biases they have themselves in relation to that conflict thing.
Yeah.
And then when they take that step of, okay, right, I better kind of engaged with these two people, or whatever the situation is in the team, the unconscious biases that exist in the conflict situation itself. I wonder whether you've experienced that, how that becomes like a blockage or a pitfall in dealing with the conflict or the tension.
Yeah, so I'm of an age where when I started my career, the boss's word went.
Yeah.
And it was the gospel according to the boss. And woe betide you if you spoke up or challenged or offered an alternative. Everyone was just like sheep, weren't they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please have my permission to think for myself and do what you want with it. So I think, and I definitely see that people really grapple with trying to break away from those historic social norms. And but this is where I try and point out to leaders and and team leaders, you're really missing the gift of innovative thinking and ideas by not
being neutral.
Yeah,
and being neutral.
Yeah, and inviting those voices into the room. So one of the ways that I offer to try and break those cycles is to run. I'm licensed in the Amy Edmondson Fearless Organisation Scan, which is all about psychological safety. So running a workshop with teams using some data and careful facilitation that really forces people to speak in a kind way, not by beating the soles of their feet with rubber hose, but to talk about what it is that would make them feel psychologically safer in that group. And that's quite a nice way, because it can be fun. You know, you've got to bring an appropriate level of humor, clearly, which I always love to do, but to break down some of those kind of staid and stale expectations, to really get those voices into the room, and helping the team leader to relax into themselves as well, and say, yeah, you know, you can invite challenge. People don't have to fall out every 5 minutes. You can agree how you're going to treat mistakes when they happen. You don't have to set everyone on fire and kick them out if errors are made. You can create a climate where there is genuine connection between people, enough to truly say what's on their mind, be kind and professional with each other, and have open conversations, and be willing to help. And every time I've done it, it's been like a road to Damascus moment.
Yeah, definitely.
The scales fall from the eyes, and the conversation just shifts into a completely different space. It doesn't work in all situations, you know, where you've got ingrained conflict, perhaps a more not thoughtful, but a more intensive type approach, using one-to-one coaching, pairs type work. That might be a good way to do it. But just to start people to realize it's okay to be yourself and show up and say what you've got to say.
Do you think it's easier for a team leader, in your experience, to deal with the tension that might exist in a team as a group process, or with the two people that are having the conflict? You know, sort of like, it's almost like a one-to-one or a one-to-two kind of situation. Which do you think the team leader would maybe by default? I'm overgeneralizing here, because I guess it all depends a lot on the team leader's own perspectives and attitudes and psychology as well. But in general terms, do you think they perceive it as it's easier to deal with the conflict as a group, or in that, you know, the two people in particular that have got the tension situation?
I ask them what they're prepared to do, because there's no point in me coming in and going, right, this is what needs to happen. You've got to test the tolerance and appetite and capacity for each person, to explore what they're really up for. If it's a situation where the conflict centers around one person and who's upsetting everybody else, then I might suggest that I facilitate kind of a mediative approach between the team leader and that individual. Right. Because a group setting can easily, if you don't design it right and run it right, it can turn into you're chucking somebody to the lions.
Believe me, I've been in the situation with the eyes rolling, you know.
Yeah.
You could the speech bubble above their head was, I really don't want to be here. Why are you doing this, Joe? I've done. I've thrown myself into
and that's not kind. That's not kind. But I love group work, because more often than not, what I find out is, I'll get asked to go in and sort an argument out between Bill and Ben. Once I talk to Bill and Ben,
you're giving me that image. Okay,
no
go
pop
on.
And dungarees, right?
Yeah.
Once I talk to Bill and Ben, more often than not, I'll identify that there are systemic issues at play, and it's much easier to have a bigger conversation as part of a group and make Bill and Ben feel safer speaking about what's going on for them, without them feeling like they're being made to be wrong in some way,
or judged in some way.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So it's kinder.
The other thing that I find really interesting is I agree. I think that, one approach for every scenario is just doesn't work, and you need to kind of make a judgment call and have sort of some tentative conversations to decide the best approach. But I do find it interesting how and we might even describe it as another pitfall, if you like, or another challenge in this sort of mediating of conflict in the team, is this idea of differences of perspective. I always find it really interesting. Just let's take the scenario of there are two people, some things happen, and maybe over time, and it's really festered, and you start getting them to talk about it. And I find it really curious and actually really lovely how when you're able to get them, each one, to describe the thing, which at face value is the same thing, but actually it's not. They're looking at the thing from completely different perspectives, and just understanding each other's point of view. And I guess the other issue here is maybe being open to the other person's point of view. That by itself, that conversation by itself, all of a sudden sort of unlocks things,
It does.
because we do view the world through our own filters, don't we?
We do, and that's a really lovely observation, and one that I really enjoy it when that happens.
Me
Because
too.
you just, particularly if you're physically in the room with people, the whole energy changes. And you've just taken me back to a saying I try and live by in my own life and the work I do, which I don't know if you're familiar with the book To Kill a Mockingbird
Oh, I do.
by
Yeah,
Harper Lee.
yeah.
Where Atticus Finch says to his little girl, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And I think that that's such a powerful lesson for us all, that, being more connected with what's going on for you, and noticing the feelings and how you're processing them, and being able to just go, ask yourself the question, what if they're seeing this differently? Just to encourage people to stop, because what that helps limit is the development of an unhelpful narrative internally.
Yeah, in my head. Yeah, absolutely.
That then forms judgments I make about you, that then affects how I choose to understand what you're saying, and block off the possibility that you might just be coming at it from a different angle, that neither of us have to be right or wrong, that just being different is okay, and just getting people much more comfortable with that as a concept, and bringing it into their conversations and the rituals that they then can perhaps go on to agree to adopt, to help them manage their conversations, so they're just always being more cognizant of that. So if the team rushes in, talks over each other, there's a drumbeat of chaos and the same people not getting heard, or the same people doing all the talking, just to crack that ritual and say, okay, we're going to play with some stuff and do it differently now. We're going to do simple things like check in or check out. We're going to use the balcony analogy to just make sure everybody steps up and looks over the whole situation. Those tiny things can help make massive shifts. But I believe my job as a coach is to bring those things into the conversation, invite people to play with them, experiment and find a way of working together, so that the rituals and conversations are forced to be different. And that then, for me, that does result in behavioural change for people.
I go 100% with everything you said. Well, I'm going to challenge the thinking as
Okay.
I would do. So
I thought
think
you were being too nice to me.
No, well, the thing that struck me, I mean, I totally agree with everything you said, but it occurs to me there's a couple of things also operating here, because we've kind of suggested potential challenges in trying to manage or mediate tensions in a team or between individuals, and we've kind of suggested how they might get past that hurdle. But there's this other thing about, I'm going to name two other things which I think sometimes I've seen at play. The first is that when you start unraveling the thing, you then realize, oh, beep, this is more complex than we thought at first sort of face value. That's one bit. And then there's the other bit about, I suppose, which is more to do with people's entrenchedness. Is that a word? I don't even know if that's a word. When they kind of go, I'm not changing my perspective, point of view, whatever. And of course, that bit is related to your previous comments, which is this. I mean, psychologists will say, if you want behavioral change, you've got to try and somehow create 4 factors that might help you. One is that the person has the capacity to change. The other one is that maybe over time they have opportunity to experiment with those different behaviors, whatever, and so they get exposed to coming at something in a different way. The other one, which I think is mega important, is the desire to, or the motivation to want to change. And the last one is, and I think this is the one that's really important, particularly when you in that conflicts or tension scenario, is mega important as you come through it, the notion of reward. In other words, it was worth my while somehow, and I don't mean financial, but somehow psychologically I was rewarded, or it felt good to get past this horrible situation I was encountering in the team or with somebody, etc. So therefore the effort was worth it. And I think sometimes team leaders don't realize that they kind of go, why? Another reason why they kind of go, oh, they're old enough, ugly enough, experienced that, they'll sort it. And I don't want to go there because of all the rubbish I might encounter, and I don't want to deal with the emotion side, but it's also because they think this is going to be really difficult. And I've not really sort of explored what's required here in order to get people to come at this in a different angle and actually behave differently with one another.
That's a really interesting point. I do come across that, obviously, particularly in the work where I'm with teams where you've got decades of this whipped up frenzy of unpleasantness. What I tend to do when I start to see that's a thing is I will engage this. Normally senior stakeholders will have brought me in, and obviously without breaking confidence and making sure that I'm sticking to all the ethics and codes of practice, I'll just have a really honest conversation with them about what I'm observing, and in a nice way say, the roads are leading back to Rome here, and actually you can task this team leader with fixing it, and they might have attitudes about whether they want to do it or not, but what can you do as leaders to set the expectations you have on this team, and without making it personal and feel like an attack, share with them what your experience is of them and what the story is that's percolating, the narrative around them that is percolating around the organization that does not serve them well, and to give your leadership perspective on what you would like that narrative to move to. So, one team, they're always fighting, they're raising grievances against each other. They are HR's nightmare because it's just continuous. That's the narrative. This is how the organization experiences you guys right now. Sorry to hit you with it. We'd love to be able to say this is a really collaborative team. They don't have to like each other, but actually they can get together enough to get the work done without creating ripples of chaos or disruption in other parts of the organization. So as your team leader's leader, I'm just putting it out there that this is what we'd like to see happen, and the tolerances for us as an organization about how life currently is, that's not there anymore. So you're giving people a choice. And ultimately, if you do end up with people who won't shift, if they are critical, normally you can design the organization in a way where you can keep them in a box, and the boundaries are very clear, or the organization gets to a point that says, it's too laborious, time consuming and expensive and disruptive to continue with this person. And actually we need to start having a different conversation about how we support them find a job in an environment where they can be stuck in their ways or whatever. But ultimately leaders need to get more courageous about saying this isn't okay, and actually this is really what we'd like you to move to. How do we help you? The offer of help is always really important. We're sitting here from on high bashing the table saying sort yourselves out. We're saying that we can't carry on like this. This is where we'd like to see you to move to. How do we help you?
You know, the problem with these chats is that I rediscover how much more there is to know about the subject. But in the meantime, you can tap below to get the links and show notes. And if you enjoyed what you heard and you want to hear more, why not follow or subscribe to the show, share the podcast, or tell your friends about Gobbo. But most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me, Joe España, on LinkedIn or get in touch via the website. I'd love to keep the conversation going. Let me have your thoughts, questions, or ideas for topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes. Take care, and I'll catch up with you next time. Adiós. Hasta pronto.